Well, I think my love of bushcraft has been organically growing all of the time. There's no real start point. I consider myself to be a lifelong student of a variety of different subjects which come under the umbrella of bushcraft. Growing up, I was fascinated by being able to take resources and do something with them. I suppose that's where it has its grassroots. When I set up Woodland Ways, it was through a passion for wanting to teach the skills and pass on the knowledge that I had, but also to enable me to continue on my learning journey. The bushcraft biker idea has come through as a manifest of a lot of different influences. You know, I have a passion for bikes. I love motorbikes. When you run your own business, you're obsessed with it. You cannot think about anything else. When I jump on a motorbike, I can't think about the business. I'm constantly tuned into what I'm doing and what everybody else is doing on the road and my connection to the bike. So I love being on it because it means that my brain gets a rest from Woodland Ways. So actually the motorbike, I kind of use it as a conduit to go and meet these other individuals who are doing work in such incredibly inspiring ways, different to how I do it and different to what I'm doing, but I'm going to learn something from each and every one of them, and I hope they will learn something from me. So the motorbike is enabling me to travel across landscapes which aren't ordinarily accessed by most people, taking the roads less travelled, taking the green lanes, trying to see as much of the countryside as I can, and then upon arrival to interview and to speak, that motorbike has enabled me to get there, and then it's my role to enable people to have a platform to be able to tell their stories, because everybody's story is important, I think. What I do understand is that bushcraft is very, very powerful, and it can help us as individuals, and it can help us to ultimately conserve the environments that we are working and living in. And so I'm hoping to broaden my horizons by meeting these other individuals. I'm really excited about meeting Helen. I don't know her, but with brief conversations about what we're trying to achieve, I really liked the fact that she identified that the narrative has to change. This old, established, white, middle-class, middle-aged bushcrafter is not the full story of bushcraft, and she understands that, and she's doing some incredible work from what I can see at face value. So I'm interested in going to meet her and finding out more about that work. I don't know what to expect, and that's really the key driver for this.
Firstly, I think I'm a teacher. I think that is probably something, if I had a different life and gone to university, I might have come out of this a teacher, a trained teacher. But I didn't go to university and do all those things, so I came at it through a training background. I like people. And generally, I can be in such a way that people like me, particularly folk that feel a bit vulnerable. I think I'm quite good at making people feel safe. And so when you've got a bit of a natural tendency to do that or be that, then it's a natural place to sort of put all your energy and make as your living. I'm so proud of our group. I was keen to show Jason that there is bushcraft here in North Essex, which is not normally an area associated with such activities. We've not got big hills, raging rivers or anything like that. It is farmland. You're lucky if you can get the occasional bit of woodland and some meadows, but it is also thriving with wildlife. So in some ways, bushcraft is just a perfect combination of marrying up my love of the outdoors, the primitive, getting your hands dirty in the soil, and working with people and sharing that. I get an enormous amount back from it, and I'm not daft. I know that all of this, we do all that we have to do because we're motivated by our own needs. So clearly it meets a need in me to feel that I've taught and helped someone have a better day. When I worked with Wild CCI, I can remember the first session I had with them. We were all so nervous. They were so nervous, I was so nervous. It had been built up to be quite a big thing, all these young people anxious and not come out of their bedrooms for years, some of them, and they wanted to do bushcraft with me. And so I think my job here has mostly been about enabling people to feel happy, safe and relaxed in this environment, and then it has been my job to push but encourage and enable them to experiment with different activities using nature as the core feature. So whether it's using wood and knife work or fire. We do a lot of cooking because that's a nice easy way to connect lots of people together and we can all get involved. So whilst I come here as a bushcraft instructor, I think I'm much more of a group facilitator when I'm with these guys. When I meet a young person for the first time, my first instinct is to want to just get to know what makes them tick. Do they like me being enthusiastic and energetic, or do they need a gentler, more discreet approach? I think that's one of the things I can do well, is that I'm quite good at reading someone's needs and adjusting. I always do bite size, bit by bit. I think it's important that people understand why they're doing the things that I'm asking them to do. So it's just about getting to know the young person really, and then adjusting to them. I like that part of my job, getting to know them and then being able to give them something that they can really relate to. I think it's been a really big learning curve for me working with these guys. Every week of the year we're here, and having done it for 5 years with this group, I've had challenges to my facilitating style. I've had to step back and think, hang on, what I've ordinarily done doesn't work here. I've had some of those painful moments as a facilitator where I've had to sort of swallow my pride a little bit and go, okay, got to take that on board. At the same time, I've seen my facilitation skills get better. They've given me a certain freedom because I've got to know them so well, they've got to know me, and we work so well together. We've seen several students do really, really well here, and there was one student in particular who was here right from the very beginning, and he was at first very separated from the group. He wouldn't be in the circle, he'd be on the edge and head down, and I can remember teaching him, I think it must have been knife work we were doing, and I clocked on really quickly as a perfectionist. He wants to do everything really perfectly, and if it's not perfect, then he's not happy with himself. And that became a starting point of our relationship, if you like, that I began to tap into that, challenge it a little bit, get him to believe in himself a little bit more without having to be A-star perfect at what he was doing. And he became, over a period of about 1.5 years, a really influential person within the group. I was flattered that he asked me to come to his graduation ceremony at the college, which I did, and in his acceptance speech he mentioned me and the sessions here and how positive they had been. I think he described me as the most positive person he'd ever met or something like that, and I not necessarily see myself like that, but to him I was, and that was a real moment for me. That felt like, yeah, I've had an impact, the group's had an impact, the place has had an impact. The Women in the Woods group that I started that group because I'd done women's groups at the Wilderness Foundation before, and they were time limited, like 10 weeks at a time, and I'd seen the impact that they'd had, that they'd done so much good. And as we were all coming out of lockdown, I was working with a lot of children, and their mothers were so stressed out and overwhelmed. They'd been home-editing, coping with all the COVID restrictions and all of that kind of thing. And I really wanted to give something back to them. I really wanted them to have a space for their own. So I started Women in the Woods. It's deliberately a low price point. I don't expect people to pay if they can't, because I really want women to find a space that they could just relax. I thought I was going to get lots of young mums. That was my initial target audience. Hasn't turned out quite like that. It's mostly older women, not always, but mostly, who are giving themselves the time and permission to have that space for themselves now. And they own it. They explore and experiment in the woods, I think. We talk a lot, so we explore things through talking and conversation, but they've also really enjoyed learning skills like knife work and fire that perhaps they'd always associated with their partners doing, rather than women. And actually like, oh yeah, it's really nice that I can light the fire when we go camping. They go back, they tell their families what they got up to in the woods, and you know, their sons and partners are jealous. They're owning something that wouldn't ordinarily be owned by women. I think that's what we're doing in the woods. The Women in the Woods group, firstly, it's very safe. Instantly there's a feeling of no judgment. I think the campfire circle creates that space too. I think when you sit in a circle, we're all equal. The campfire is so earthy and primitive, and there is something very equalising about that space. Being all women together, there is a lot of camaraderie, a lot of empathy. There is sometimes, discussion of issues and challenges and problems, and they know they've got a sympathetic audience. They know they're not going to have to try and convince or cajole or have to justify their thoughts and feelings. They can just be. There's two things going on. There's groups and then there's nature. And when groups and nature come together, it's just a magical combination. As a female instructor in what was traditionally, at least when I started a good few years ago, a very male-dominated industry, I did feel out on a limb and sometimes felt not taken seriously when I did meet up with other practitioners. I think it took me a few years to realise that I don't have to try and be like them, and once I gave myself a bit more freedom to just actually, you can be who you want to be, I felt much happier and more comfortable in my role. It still happens to this day. If I've got one of my male team members with me and I'm with a customer, the customer will talk to them rather than to me, and that can be upsetting sometimes, depending on how resilient I'm feeling on that particular day. It can make me angry. But at the same time, it's the conditions and the norms that we're all trying to challenge, so, I try and do it gracefully. I also like being a bit unconventional, and, it's part of my identity now has become this person that spends as much time outdoors as possible and learning as much as I can about nature. I think being a woman has enabled me to develop a unique customer base. I've been able to develop very trusting relationships. People have given me the care of their children, doing crazy things sometimes, whether it's leaping streams or, knife work and things like that. They trust me, and I think in large part it's been because I'm a woman. So it's played to my advantage in lots of ways as well.
What an incredible few days, arriving on the Triumph and transitioning into what was quite an alien environment to me, even though I can recognise some of the skills that are being used. They're just being used in an entirely different way, and that is really thought-provoking for me. I'll tell you what really stood out when I first arrived. Strangely enough, it transported me straight to the Maasai village, and Helen had been utilising the skills of thatching in a very similar way as to how the Maasai women build their houses. It really struck me that Helen has a vulnerability, and the group have a vulnerability about them, but actually it's demonstrated as a strength. And that was really powerful to see. The peer-to-peer learning was clearly really important. It's not an instructor to student relationship. The group were all learning from each other, and Helen was taking from the group as well as giving to the group, and I thought that was really quite powerful to see. One of the things that I've really struggled with historically was an emphasis on single sex groups. I've really studied this with my masters, and my views are changing on it, and those views, they come from a privileged background, and so it's very heavily influenced by my history, but those views are changing, and spending time here actually validates that shifting viewpoint now. I can see that it's not just black and white, it's not cut and dry. There are different influences on absolutely everybody, and being able to use the skills of bushcraft to enable people to have spaces that they are comfortable in because of whatever influence has been in their own lives, that is huge. And I'm really looking forward to exploring that in more detail as we go through this series and listen to more people's stories.